Welcome on in, Browns fans. It's Spencer German. It's Anthony Moeglin with you for another conversation here with the Cleveland Browns on SI as we get you ready for the NFL Combine coming up next week. And certainly with the Browns, there's a lot to talk about. So many different storylines, so many different narratives, and the biggest ones obviously centering around the quarterback position, the Browns' flirtation with some of these quarterbacks that are going to be making their appearance at the Combine, and trying to put on a good show for these scouts and everybody. But there's a lot to get into. Megs, I guess I'll start by asking, because I don't think you and I have had a chance to do one of these together in a little while.
Yeah.
How has your off season been?
Yeah, off season, good start to the off season, right? It was what was the Super Bowl last week, 2 weeks ago?
A little over like a week and a half ago.
We didn't even talk about it. That was the thumping by the Eagles. That a team that the Browns only lost to by 4, but that's neither here nor there. Off season off to a good start. Got a lot of content going up on all of our different sites, all of our different platforms. So the best part about the NFL, dude, doesn't stop, right? The Super Bowl happens last week, 2 weeks ago, and right into the Combine. So it's awesome. The news cycle just continues to churn on.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to spend some time talking about your political stance on the halftime show, we could do that. I mean, I don't know that that's what our channel's for, but if you have some thoughts, I mean,
something just came up. I gotta go.
Oh man, I'm a Kendrick Lamar fan, so I enjoyed it, but that's just me. I also think, just real quick, I was gonna say the people that didn't get it or that were like, I don't understand what he's saying. I think that was just a sign that it wasn't for you. But
Correct.
I don't think that it meant it was the worst halftime show ever. I just don't think it was the most watched halftime show ever based on the ratings. So clearly there were people that wanted to watch it and enjoyed it. It just wasn't for you. So it's okay to admit that it wasn't for you. You don't have to get all mad and bent out of shape about it. That's all I'll say.
I fell in the category. I'm not the number one K-Dot fan. I fell in the category of hey, it was good. I liked it. Could have played better music. Could have not. I don't.
Yeah. I missed a few songs that I wish from my college days that I really wanted him to play. But I think it became about the spectacle of the beef with Drake. Yeah. That's what it was. That's all it really was at the end of the day.
I'm a very surface level type of a guy, so I didn't look too far into anything else other than the songs that were being played, and that's just the way I approached it. Yeah. I liked it. I enjoyed it. Thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, I went down that rabbit hole when the beef was going on, and they were going back and forth, what every line meant, what they were saying to each other. So I was very well in tune with everything that was being discussed, but I think it was just the stunning fact that he actually called out Drake in a song at the Super Bowl that sort of stood out. But yeah, the Drake, I guess, Kendrick rather, owned Drake at the Super Bowl. The Eagles owned the Chiefs at the Super Bowl, which many people were excited about. And the Myles Garrett is kind of owning the Browns right now, I would say, here in Cleveland. And I think this kind of sets the stage, Megs, as we get ready for the Combine next week for there's a lot of storylines surrounding this Browns team right now. And we don't have we haven't had a chance to hear from anyone within the Browns organization really about these things. You heard from Andrew Berry at the Senior Bowl in regards to trading Myles Garrett, but he knew at the time that Myles Garrett was going to request a trade. We didn't know publicly though that he was going to do it. And so this is going to be the first time he talks about it with everybody knowing that those are his intentions. Kevin Stefanski is going to be asked about it, I'm sure as well. And that's on top of, the different mindsets of where they should go in the draft, what they should do at number 2, what quarterbacks they may be interested in. So there's going to be so much to discuss. And I guess I want to ask you, what is the biggest thing, of all these different things that are at the forefront of this Browns team right now, what are you most interested to hear the Browns brass and maybe even some of the players at the Combine speak on? As it pertains to the Browns.
Yeah, the thing I'm most curious about is how open they are about talking about these quarterbacks, because we've seen, and you and I know this because this is what we do. You're in the locker room with these guys, you're traveling around, you've heard Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry talk a number of times, and we kind of know their code right now where it's hey, they move very silently. I think you tweeted that or posted that the other day. And I'm really curious to see how they approach these quarterback questions. Who are they talking about? Shador? Are they talking about Cam or somebody else? Or are they do they give their typical like coach talk answers where they're very, very cut and dry, giving you nothing by saying a lot? So I'm curious to see how they approach that. And truthfully, I'm obviously, these are the two fastballs here, but I'm curious to hear what their update or their status is on the Myles Garrett stuff. Like, again, same kind of idea. They don't like to give a lot away, but at this point, Myles has like gone on his like media parade on how he's talked about how he can play with Jaden Daniels and he would fit in well here or fit in well with the Eagles and all that stuff. Like, I'm curious to hear what the Browns have to say behind closed doors. We've listened to a number of clips from different people, insiders, and they're saying the Browns are trying to hold firm and do that. Are they doing that to up the trade values? Probably. But I'm curious to hear and try to decipher how these guys are moving their chess pieces around.
Yeah, I don't want to be like a fence sitter here, but there's sort of two different angles as in terms of how these maybe two biggest overarching stories go that I'm interested in at the combine, because I'm less interested in like what Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry are going to say about Myles Garrett, because I mean, yeah, there's going to be some reading between the lines on things to find out like, okay, are they just trying to play hardball right now to get the price up, and are they actually going to trade him? So there will be some of that going on. But we know that they don't really say much about that type of stuff. They keep a lot of that stuff in-house. And so I'm more curious, like the combine is where, there's a lot of talking going on. There's like the streets are often talking in Indianapolis. And so like I'm kind of curious to just like see and hear what people are saying from the outside perspective about the Browns. And if people have a better read on like what types of calls are being made and what the Browns are telling people, that's the stuff that I'm kind of curious to find out from as far as Myles Garrett's concerned. But from a standpoint of like Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski, I am all in on deciphering every little thing that they're going to say about these quarterbacks, because there's been a lot said about Shedeur Sanders. There's been a lot of smoke linking the Browns to Shedeur Sanders, but they haven't interacted much with Cam Ward yet. Mm-hmm. And so this is kind of going to be their first chance to do that on like this public setting, this public forum at the NFL Combine. And so I'm fascinated to sort of find out, if this is all just them, throwing things out there because it's smokescreen season, or if this is them like legitimately, signaling that like, we maybe it's obvious that they're looking at Shedeur Sanders or somebody because it's obvious that they need a quarterback. Like maybe it is just the way it's going to kind of play out. But how this narrative maybe shifts or how it changes or what other, tea leaves we can maybe pick up on when those guys are talking, that's the thing that I'm so fascinated about, because it's been all Shedeur Sanders to this point, and it's crazy. Like there's still like 2 plus months to go until the NFL draft, and people are already assuming that they've made up their mind on who they're taking. And it's like I don't know, man. Like a lot can change between now and April 24th.
And I'm also curious on that same side of the coin of like, what does Shedeur have to say? Because he's been very vocal, right? We saw that blog come out or that vlog, I should say, where he says he plays Madden with the Browns. Like we got to remember,
lying, right? By the way,
yeah. Well, so that's the thing, Spence. Like it's his production, like it's his vlog. Yes, of course. He's.
Do you know anybody outside of Cleveland?
No,
that is a Browns fan that willingly is like, hey, I'm playing Madden with the boys tonight, and they're like, hey, let's play with the Browns, man. I love Deshaun Watson and Jerry Jeudy. Like, no. And that's no disrespect to Jerry. That was a low blow to Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Judy's a good player.
Cool.
He's a number one wide receiver. But, like, you know what I mean? Like, nobody's saying that. Like, come on. No. Like, nobody's playing as the Browns. I saw that video, and I instantly was like, this is fake as hell.
Come on.
Like, this dude is – and listen, I don't blame him. I think on some level, like, he's trying to play that game. Like, this is where my mind went with it, because – I'm thinking about the fact that Shedeur is the son of an NFL Hall of Famer who used to work in the media. Like, he knows that this is going to go viral. He knows that people are going to talk about this. So to me, as much as we all want to be like, this is the latest flirtation, he's going to the Browns, he wants to do this. And I will say, like, if Shedeur Sanders is drafted by the Browns, I do think he would embrace that challenge. Yeah. I don't think he's scared of that at all. But I also feel like this is him just like adding to the fire, like pouring some more, like, throwing another log on it to get people sort of like revved up and talking about it, because he knows how to play the game. But I don't necessarily think that like this was some grand, sign that he's going to be going to Cleveland.
And too, like it is it almost posturing to the Raiders or the Giants? Like hey, these guys are interested in me. Like, come
And
up.
I'm interested in them. Yeah.
Come and get me. Like, come and trade up. Like, they're gonna pick me at 2. Like, is that like almost like a smoke screen or a smoke signal, if you will?
That's an interesting point, Anthony, because I mean, like, we know he wore the Giants colored cleats in his bowl game and like all these different things, and that's not to say like if the Browns, there's been no indication at this point that he wouldn't play for the Browns if they drafted him. But
right.
like, as much as the Browns might be trying to manipulate things, Shedeur can very much try to manipulate things in his favor as well, and that could be what he's trying to do here too.
And so can Pops too, right? He was on Super Bowl week saying that he met with Cleveland. Like, yep, he was very adamant about the fact that he met with the Browns. He said it. He said the name. So it's like, how are those two approaching it? Because, like, to your point, none of this is an accident. That was Shedeur's vlog that he released, that he edited, right? That's not an accident that this stuff's getting leaked. So I'm really curious to hear that. Also curious to hear from Cam Ward in that same sense, because we've heard all year long, for the last 4 years, really, you've heard from Shedeur Sanders, and he's been kind of the face of Colorado for sure, but I'm not going to say of college football, but a huge face in college football. Cam Ward, not so much. Guy who's transferred around, found a home at the University of Miami, had an unbelievable season last year, and put himself in a great position to not only make a boatload of cash, but put himself in a position to turn a franchise around. And feels like just the small things you've learned about him is that he's that kind of a guy who's got that a little bit of dog in him, right? Where he doesn't back down from anything, doesn't back down from a challenge. And I'm really excited to hear what he has to say about the whole process too.
Yeah. And listen, here's my stance on everything Shedeur Sanders right now, because I was kind of getting excited about the idea of like, hey, like, we're going to have a rookie quarterback to cover next year. And I think Shedeur is going to be like I think he could be a great leader. I think he's a better fit for Kevin Stefanski's system. Like, there's a lot to like about that player. And so because of that, like, I was starting to lean into it myself until this past week. And over this past week, it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. I think the video of him talking about the Madden thing was part of it, but I also think like it hit me just like a ton of bricks. What we talked about already, like, this organization, since Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski have taken over, there's not a lot that gets out. Like, they don't leak a lot of information. People they're interested in, like, you don't really hear much about it. And so it feels like this is purposeful, that there's been so much noise linking them to Shedeur Sanders, almost like it's too good to be true. And so because of that, because that's what we've heard to this point, you bring up Cam Ward, I'm almost fascinated to learn, like, was all this for a purpose? Because maybe they actually want Cam Ward. Like, are they trying to manipulate the board to get the Giants to, like, hey, if you want Shedeur Sanders, you're going to have to jump us to get him. So go make a trade with the Titans, and then that gets Shedeur Sanders off the board, and then they can take Cam Ward. Like, who knows what the game plan kind of is here. But this is why, like, their interactions with Cam Ward, what Cam Ward maybe says, and you might end up getting more from, like, the player than you will, like, Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski when they talk about it. Like, what Cam Ward says about if he met with the Browns, what that meeting is going to be, like what that meeting was like when he met with the Browns, that type of stuff. That's all the different things that I'm like fascinated to get answers on and hear about, because, if this is all just a ploy to, alter the way the board maybe falls and get yourself somebody that you think is maybe the better quarterback, I think that's kind of an interesting way to look at this thing, because we haven't heard of it's almost one of those, like, hey, look over here, we're so interested in Shedeur Sanders, when really, like, your attention's over here instead. Like a sleight of hand type trick by the Browns. And so I'm fascinated to see, like, if there is steam that picks up around their interest in Cam Ward, or if it's like the opposite narrative, like if it's been all Shedeur Sanders and then this next week you hear, yeah, they don't really have a lot of interest in Cam Ward. Yeah. Okay, well, maybe that's them being like, we don't want people to know that we actually like him. That's what makes this time of year sort of fun, but also sort of annoying, because it's like so much like just BS all the time that you got to like try to decipher. But at the same time, it's fascinating to kind of get a sense of where these teams' heads are at and like where they could be leaning, and again, have to try to like piece it all together like a puzzle to figure out like where they're actually trying to go come April. But that's definitely, to your point, something that I'm interested to kind of see. Like, there's been a Shedeur Sanders narrative already. Now, what does the Cam Ward narrative sound like as it relates to the Browns?
Man, don't you miss this? Like, Last year, we coming off a playoff. The Browns coming off a playoff run ish. An entry to the playoffs, I should say. And then they come out. They have a later round draft pick. We're not doing all this stuff. Now we're back. Feels like we're home, dude. Feels nice.
Is that what Browns fans want though? Because
No,
we spent so many years saying that this was the Browns fans' Super Bowl, was the draft, and now it's like,
this sucks.
Wouldn't they rather have the playoff win?
Yes, this is horrible. This is awful. This sucks. This is the worst thing. I mean, it's just it's tough because now that not only do you get into that conversation, but then you get into the conversation of, are these two guys good enough? And are Browns fans just addicted to misery? Like, are they just addicted to saying that these aren't the right ones? We'll come back next year when Arch Manning's available. Well, that means another miserable fall, which nobody wants.
Yeah. So here's what I think this is a good place to go kind of next year, at least for a minute, because, I started the offseason saying, like, I don't know if these guys are worthy of the number 2 pick. And, like, you could trade back, get a pick for next year and sort of position yourself to, like, okay, we can trade up and get our guy next year if you already know you like next year's class. But I also do think, Megs, like, if you're a GM of a team, like you can only plot out so much in advance. Like there's so many factors that go into, all right, let's wait on a quarterback and take one next year when we think Arch Manning is going to come out, but you never know. He could go back to college again.
Yeah.
Maybe they really like Drew Aller. Okay. Well, maybe he comes out, but like you have a whole season to play where you could end up being in the top 10, or you could end up being like 16, 17, 18 and have a tougher time getting up into the top 10 to actually get a quarterback. Your needs could change. Like other things could change. A guy could get hurt in college. There's so many factors that go into, like setting yourself up to draft a quarterback in any given year that I just think it's too difficult to like sit back this year and be like, well, we'll just figure it out next year. Like that just doesn't feel like the mentality that you would take. Like if they legitimately like one of these guys, they have to take him at 2. They have to. Yeah. Like, and that's kind of where my head's at with it. I was just talking about this on another platform yesterday. Like for me, if you're talking about veterans, and I do think Browns fans have kind of gotten in this rut where nobody likes any of the veteran options, which like, I don't know if you're trying to find a veteran option in free agency or something like that, like there's never going to be good options available. Like the Deshaun Watson thing was such an anomaly at the time that he was available as theoretically a top 5 quarterback at the time. Even though he hadn't played football in a couple of years, like you don't get that very often. So yeah, like I know you're not going to love the idea of Kirk Cousins. I know you're not going to love the idea of like Sam Darnold, but if you take one of those guys, you're kind of just accepting like, okay, we're hoping that this kind of turns into more than what it maybe could be. And that's, that's fine. But like my philosophy on this at this point now, Megs, is I've done a complete 180 where I'm like, if they can get Matt Stafford, that to me is like the one quarterback that feels like a veteran option that's worthwhile. Like, okay, he can still sling it. He's a guy that's won a Super Bowl. I would try like that's like we're still competitive. We're trying to win now while also understanding like he's old, so we're going to replace him at some point. I say old, but like old for a football sense.
Yeah.
But aside from that, like to me, like I'd rather take the rookie who has like a ton of upside, could be coached up, could be great at the next level than like any of these other like veteran options that are out there. And so that's where my head's at with it now.
No, you're spot on. And the other thing too is like if you do sign up to try to punt this thing off, like you started your kind of your point about, like kiss Andrew Berry goodbye, kiss Kevin Stefanski goodbye, because it's like you're signing up for another bad season. And to your point too, like if you would have asked me when you were in Baltimore, like who are you going to take? I'm like, I don't know, probably a guy like Abdul Carter, some of these guys who feels like they're slam dunks. However, if you don't have a quarterback, you don't win football games in the NFL. The Browns are the perfect.
I mean, the Browns have had Myles Garrett for how long?
And Joe Thomas. You had
they got one playoff win to show for it.
Yeah, 2 Hall of Famers, and you didn't have a quarterback for their entire stretch. And the 1 year you did, you go to the playoffs. Or the 2 years you had a decent one, you go to the playoffs. So it's like okay, you know exactly what you need. And guess what? If these guys miss, if you take a swing on Shador, you take a swing on Cam, and they're bad, pick Arch next year when you're back drafted number 1 overall. You know what I mean? You'll be back to where you're at. It's a bad place to be in. It's funny. It's such a Browns thing that the number 2 pick last year's Jaden Daniels, and we're 1 year away from that. I know that's just a stupid fan thing that floats around, but yeah, we'll see how it all shakes out, and we're going to learn a lot about where the Browns are postured or where they're viewing this by this time next week.
Oh, by the way, nobody's talking enough about the idea that you could always take a quarterback again next year in the first round if you stink again. Like, I know that's kind of a taboo thing, but the Cardinals did it.
Yeah.
The Cardinals did it with Josh Rosen, then took Kyler Murray, and Kyler Murray's fine. Like he's a good quarterback in the NFL. You know, he's borderline top 10. I think he's at times been top 10, maybe other times not been top 10. But like, who's to say you can't do that? If you take Shador and he stinks, and then you're top 3 again next year, why can't you take Drew Aller? Like who's to say you can't?
There's that. There's also go back to the 2000 whatever Redskins where they take RG3 top 3 overall, and then they take Kirk Cousins in the 5th round. Okay, if Kyle McCord is sitting there with one of your 19 picks you have, do you take him? Do you take Will Howard in the 2nd round if he's still there? Like, you know, what do you there's a lot of options. There's a lot of things that have been done, precedents set in the past that you could go down. I don't know. I don't know. It's not a job, and it's not a decision that I envy.
No, not at all. And obviously, you know, Andrew Barrett's got to deal with that. It's also fair to wonder, like, if they take a quarterback and they stink, there's probably a new regime in here anyway, and that regime could take their own quarterback regardless. So, I think that's all interesting too. I think the quarterback conversation does kind of play off of the Myles Garrett conversation though a little bit too, because I find that interesting that he's out there making the rounds on Radio Row. He's talking about playing with Jaden Daniels and all these different things. And like, I don't know, like to me, when he starts talking about these quarterbacks that he wants to play with, that to me feels like there is like a path back to the Browns. Because I think Jaden Daniels is the perfect example. And this is not to say there's a Jaden Daniels in this draft class. I'm not trying to compare any of these guys to Jaden Daniels and say in year 1 they're going to like put up these mega numbers and take their team to the conference championship game. But like that's unrealistic expectation to put on a rookie. But, like, who's to say that the Browns can't draft the right guy, and then that guy ends up being really good in his first year, and all of a sudden Myles Garrett's like, hey, you know what? Like, maybe I do like this guy. Like, like a year ago, I know there was a lot of hype about Jaden Daniels, but were people thinking that he was going to go to some team and then take that team to the NFC Championship game? No. Like, nobody was talking about that as a possibility. So, I don't know. I just wonder if, like, if they take the right rookie, could that be a way to get Myles Garrett back to the table? Or if they end up with Matt Stafford, is that a way to like prove to Myles Garrett that you're still staying competitive? Because if his big thing is the quarterback position, again, it's not easy. I don't want to make it sound like it's just easy to find those guys and like turn your franchise around, quickly. But if you do hit on the right guy, you can turn your franchise around quickly, and the Commanders are proof of that.
You absolutely can. And I think the one thing that really stands out to me in that Commander scenario is you could look at all 32 teams, I think, and there's not many matches between quarterback and coordinator that are better than what's going on in Washington. Like Cliff and Jaden were the perfect match. Like there's only a couple of those, and one of them is Kellen Moore and Jalen Hurts, who obviously Moore's now the coach in New Orleans.
Now he's got Derek Carr, so
yeah, right. So it's like there's not a better match than what you saw in Washington. And from everything we know about Shador, and as we're continuing to learn about him, you're realizing like, oh, he's a guy who would be perfect for Kevin Stefanski. Tall, he's very accurate, very on time with the ball, like all those things. He doesn't have the rocket arm, but he can be a guy who can be coached. He's really smart, can play from under center. And you think about it, it's like if that match works out, now you have something. Now you have something on your hands, and that would be like, all right, to your point, if Myles does stick around and he's maybe sitting out next year because he doesn't want to ruin his trade value, it's like, oh, maybe we got something. Maybe we can go play. Maybe I can make a difference here for the Browns.
I do think there's a conversation to be had about how ugly Myles Garrett could make this thing. Mm-hmm. We don't have to have that right now, but like as we get into like off-season program stuff and all these different things, like I think that's a conversation worth having at some point. I guess, Megs, we know the quarterbacks are going to be one of the biggest dominant part of the conversation, but what other, are there any other players, any other position groups that you really have your eye on going into Combine Week, guys that you're excited to sort of see in action and see also like how the Browns or these players how the Browns are talking about certain players or how some of these players might be talking about their interactions with the Browns?
Yeah, I think that this is a really good opportunity. This is an amazing draft to build a ton of depth. The Browns, like I joked earlier about them having 19 picks. They have a ton. They have a ton of draft capital. They got a number of rounds where they have multiple picks. I don't have it at the top of my head right now, but this is a really huge opportunity for them. They have, I think it's 4 picks in the top 100 to hit on some game-changing type players. And you look around the roster, okay? You're aging at the offensive line position. You're aging at the running back position with Nick Chubb, not only aging a little bit, but also being just bruised and battered. 2 major injuries that he's coming off of. Then you look at the wide receiver position. You feel solid about it, but there's always opportunity to add a guy and try to improve that position. You look at tight end. You see the tight end room, and you're like, hey, we love David Njoku, but he's going to be 29. He's going to be 30 here soon. You know, how much left does he have in the tank? And that leads you to believe, just offensively specifically, like who are the guys you take a look at? I'm looking at the running back room. I'm looking at a guy like Quinshon Judkins, obviously do some work for Ohio State, so I got to follow the Buckeyes all year long. Quinshon's a guy, and I think you even said it, remind you of Kareem Hunt, who runs like with this amazing anger. Like if you're in front of him and he's got the football, he's going to make your life hell.
He seeks out contact. He like loves it. Yeah.
It's old school type of running. I'm excited to see how he tests. He's not the biggest guy, but he's everything you need in a running back. Good hands, good elusiveness. I'm excited to see that conversation. I'm also excited to see what Harold Fannin from Bowling Green does. He's the tight end. Now, he's a really good tight end. I've obviously drank the Kool-Aid on him. He's an Ohio kid, and he's awesome. I think he's from Canton, right? Yeah, I
believe so. Yes,
Kinley Bulldog, repping the 330, my guy. But excited to see what he brings to the table. This is a guy who, in the MAC level, dominated games. Don't know where he'll go. They're saying like 3rd round-ish, but he's got the ceiling to be a game-changing type guy, and you've seen it across the NFL. A good tight end unlocks an offense. You look at Kansas City, you look at Philly, you look all across the league, Buffalo, some of the major teams that you're competing against, Baltimore as well, even Pittsburgh, all have great tight ends. When you have a good tight end, that unlocks an offense. We saw it when Joe Flacco was here, and he unlocked David Njoku. So I'm excited to see what they're looking at in terms of that tight end room as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Browns have so many needs beyond just the quarterback position. Especially if Myles Garrett's not here, like defensive end becomes even a higher priority, which I think it already was a pretty high priority because you needed somebody to line up opposite of him anyway. So there's so many different areas you could look, and I've been trying to sort of pinpoint like what positions I think they're going to address in the draft versus free agency. I'm willing to sit here though and tell you like February, late February. I can almost guarantee you the Browns are taking a running back in this draft at some point. Like it just feels inevitable. I also feel like I can almost guarantee you that the Browns are going to re-sign Nick Chubb, and then they're going to find somebody in the draft that will become like their headliner running back with Nick Chubb as kind of like a supporting role. Mm-hmm. It just feels like that's inevitable. So yeah, like you bring up Quinshon Judkins, like I'll be watching this running back group really closely because I think at some point the Browns are going to pull the trigger on one of those guys and find their potential running back of the future. Going back to Kevin Stefanski's offense, the run game's massively important. But then you still think about like, okay, if they use a pick on a running back, they need to find a tackle at some point. So I'll be looking. We know sort of about the top guys at offensive tackle: Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks Jr. How far does Josh Simmons fall? So he's somebody on there. Josh Connerly. I know he had that one bad rep against Mike Green at the Senior Bowl, but everyone still said like consensusly like he's a pretty good prospect. So there's some guys that I think are going to be available, and it's like where do they kind of end up going? And then the other part of this too is like wide receiver. We know that's a need for the Browns. Andrew Berry almost always drafts a wide receiver, and he hasn't been able to hit on one that's turned into like a great player yet. So I think there's some pressure there to finally do that. I'm intrigued by Luther Burton because he's kind of like this gadget player guy that the Browns could use. But, he's kind of like he's consensusly been like one of the top 2 or 3 wide receivers grade wise. And so, is he going to be somebody that's available to you in the second round? Probably not. So where do the Browns kind of go with that? So there's so many different avenues. But, that's a few of the names that I think I kind of have my eye on. But it's going to be interesting to see, again, like what positions they target in free agency and then what that leaves on the table when the draft does roll around, some of these other position groups that they might be trying to fill with young talent. And we know how important that's going to be because you didn't have 3 first-round picks the last 3 years. So this draft really is an important one for Andrew Berry to supplement the roster in areas that he hasn't been able to the last couple of years.
Yeah, Browns have their selections in rounds 1 through 4. Also in round 6, they added an additional 3rd from the Amari Cooper trade. They added a 5th and a 6th from the Zadarius Smith trade, and then they had a 6th-round pick from the Chris Williams trade. So you have a ton of draft capital. They have 12 picks overall in this draft.
And by the way, we talked about like smokescreen season with the Shedeur Sanders stuff. That could also just be a ploy for them to trade back. Like maybe they do decide that they don't like these quarterbacks enough and they trade back and they decide we're going to try to get as many picks as possible. And then that goes back to what I said. Like that's how you fill a bunch of needs quickly is like, hey, let's get a second first rounder this year. Let's get another second rounder this year. And then you're taking like 4 guys maybe in the first 2 rounds that you feel like could be day one starters for you and fill needs. So, it all come down to how they feel about these quarterbacks and whether or not they really want to pull the trigger on 1 or 2. But if they really end up liking Jackson Dart, for example, maybe they're like, hey, let's trade back. We can get Dart late first round. We'll trade back up, and we're still going to make another pick in this round, and then we're going to make 2 picks in the second round. Like there's so many different options of what all this means, but that's why this time of year is kind of – it's annoying and fun at the same time, as I alluded to earlier.
It's funny because I saw it all – goes to if you hit on your draft pick, but I saw a post of like that exact scenario where you talked about like, hey, Browns trade back, and somebody posted was like, hey, that's how you get Deshaun Kaiser instead of Patrick Mahomes, because that's the draft where you take Myles at 1 and they trade it back, they end up getting a quarterback late. But also too, there's a ton of examples where teams have gotten late round quarterbacks. The best one is the 49ers, right? If they don't hit on Brock Purdy, guess what? John Lynch is fired. Like everybody is fired. They Trey Lance. They traded up to get Trey Lance. Trey Lance played like 2 snaps for them, but
nobody remembers because of Brock Purdy.
Guess what? John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan wouldn't be the superheroes we think they are, and the run that the 49ers went on all would be for naught if they didn't hit on Mr. Irrelevant, Brock Purdy in the 7th round. Like that all can, obviously you're not banking on that, but all that's possible in that scenario where you're like, hey, we don't like these guys. We're trading back. Let's take McCord in the 6th round, or let's take Will Howard in the 3rd round and roll the dice, and we'll be back up top next year if it doesn't go well.
Yeah, a lot of different things that could play out. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves, I think, as well, just because we're excited about the draft, obviously, and so much is still going to happen.
You say 2 months? Did you say 2 months away? Shit.
2 months, yeah. Still 2 months. April 24th, I believe, is night 1 of the draft, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm going to actually, you know what? Right. I'm going to double check right now to make sure that's Thursday. Right. Yep, April 24th. That's it. That's the night.
In Green Bay. That's going to be sweet, actually.
You think so?
I think so. Yeah. I'm a big proponent of these like city drafts.
I like them going place to place, but I'm also like, there's not really anything in Green Bay. I mean, the stadium is like in like neighborhoods. It's like so like they just like hang. They're just going to be chilling in these people's yards and hanging out, making picks.
On the pod, Spence, when we get to the dog days of this offseason, I'll tell the Christmas Day story from when I.
Oh, you went to that game?
Yeah, it was
the Baker 5 pick game.
Oh yeah, tough night for the kid.
What a day. Baker flew in on a private jet so he could be there, and then he just sucked up the joint.
Yeah, because he played video games all week instead of studying the tape. I remember it. I remember it vividly. We'll tell the story one day.
Who is he, Kyler Murray? I'm just kidding.
Yes, correct. So I think it'll be sweet. I'm looking forward to seeing what.
I think Green Bay is a good football town, so it should be pretty fun. I'm just like I haven't read all the details about like where they're doing it, how they're doing it. So I don't know like if it's like where the stadium is and it's just like there's nothing there, because it just seems weird for all these people to like congregate there for the draft. Mm-hmm. But if it's like, I guess if it's like downtown Green Bay, what does downtown Green Bay even look like? I've never even been.
I don't know.
You've been there?
I know that.
I've been to the stadium, but that's it, right?
I know the stadium is like a high school.
Isn't their airport not even like big? Their airport's not even big enough, because didn't Green Bay, when they went to Brazil last year for the first game of the season, didn't they have to like fly out of like Milwaukee or something? Because their airport's not big enough?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it is a wild. It gives you. It feels like you're in Friday Night Lights. Like you're just driving neighborhood, and you're like, there's Lambeau Field, the best place on earth. They do have a really cool, and this is where it'll be. Would be my guess. They have like a really cool like village. They call it like I think it's like Trophy Village or Lombardi Village, and it's got like, I remember in the wintertime it had like this 200-foot sled riding hill. Like it's got a whole bunch of stuff.
Just seems like a weird place. Like, hey, let's fly all these people into Green Bay to hang out. I don't know. And like I get it. Cleveland gets a bad rap too. People are like, Cleveland sucks. But
that draft in Cleveland was sick though. That was cool. I don't know if you.
Well, it might be coming back.
It should be. That was
because
awesome.
I think the city of Cleveland was pretty upset because
it was COVID.
They didn't get their money's worth out of the draft, and so I think the NFL might end up throwing them a bone and letting it come back sooner than it probably would. So we'll see. We might be having the draft back here in Cleveland at some point. Who knows?
Do you think Goodell will pull the trigger once he's like?
We might end up having a Super Bowl here in Cleveland at some point once this dome project goes through. So, but that's a conversation for another day because PSL is coming back. Anyway, that's going to do it for Anthony Moeglin and myself. We appreciate you guys checking in with us during the offseason. We'll have plenty more content like this for you in the weeks and months ahead, especially next week from the Combine. I know Megs and I are going to connect a couple different times to talk about different things that are said, different news that comes out, whatever it might be. So we'll be here to react to it with you as part of the Cleveland Browns on SI. Be sure to head on over to si.com/NFL/Browns to keep up to date on all the latest rumors, breaking news stories, whatever it might be surrounding the Cleveland Browns and everything going on with the team. But also right here at the Cleveland Browns on SI YouTube channel, where we'll, again, have plenty more content like this, whether it's, post-press conference stuff, actual press conference footage from the guys who speak at the Combine, and so much more. We appreciate your support, as always. For Anthony Moeglin, I'm Spencer German. Keep on following along with all things Cleveland Browns with the Cleveland Browns on SI.